Good day, every nation, Bryanston. If we haven't had the pleasure to meet, my name is Julius Ndugutse Bakunzi, and it is my absolute pleasure to get to share the word with you today. Now, if you've been following us for the last 3 weeks, we've been going through a series called Amandla, and we've been learning about what the Bible says about how to use our power and how not to use our power. Now, over the last 3 weeks, we've been actually focusing on the words of Jesus. We've been looking at what he's been teaching, what he's been saying, and we've been marveling at all the intricacies of how the kingdom uses power. But if you'll notice, as we're stepping into chapter 4, Siv showed us this week that we are shifting from his words and we are shifting to the works of Jesus. We're about to step into his actions, how he actually uses his power. We are moving to his deeds. And what we are going to see, we're going to notice how many times we find ourselves dissatisfied with how he uses his power, because many times Jesus uses his power in ways that we wouldn't want him to use his power. So even though the book today that we're going to look at is called The Ones with Purpose, I'm going to subtitle this message and I'm going to call it The Jesus We Don't Want. The Jesus We Don't Want. Now, I'm going to look at 3 aspects of Jesus before I jump into this text. One, we're going to look at the Jesus that sleeps in the boat. Let's call him Sleeping Jesus. We don't want that. Secondly, we're going to look at the Jesus who casts out demons. Let's call him Weird Jesus. Because for some of us, the idea of demons and invisible entities, it's just absolutely weird. But thirdly, before we finish, we're going to look at the Jesus who drowns our pigs. Let's call him Radical Jesus. We're going to look at these 3 aspects of him, and we're going to watch how, as he's using his power, the reactions we have and the reactions we should have to the way the kingdom uses its power. Now let's go into this text. I want you to go to Matthew 8 from verse 23 all the way down to verse 34. And when he got into the boat, his disciples followed him. And behold, there arose a great storm in the sea, so that the boat was being swamped by the waves, but he was asleep. And they went and woke him, saying, "Save us, Lord, we are perishing." And he said to them, "Why are you afraid, O you of little faith?" Then he arose and rebuked the winds and the sea, and there was a great calm. And the men marveled, saying, "What sort of man is this, that even the winds and the sea obey him?" And when he came to the other side, to the country of the Gadarenes, 2 demon-possessed men met him, coming out of the tomb, so fierce that no one could pass that way. And behold, they cried out, "What have you to do with us, O Son of God? Have you come here to torment us before the time?" Now, a herd of many pigs was feeding at some distance from them, and the demons begged him, saying, "If you cast us out, send us away into the herd of pigs." And he said to them, "Go." So they came out and went into the pigs, and behold, the whole herd rushed down the steep bank into the sea and drowned into the waters. Now the herdsmen fled, and going into the city, they told everything, especially what had happened to the demon-possessed men. And behold, all the city came out to meet Jesus. And when they saw him, they begged him to leave their region. They begged him to leave their region. We're talking about the Jesus we don't want. Let me just pray before we proceed. Father, I pray your grace as we move forward. I pray your word would come alive today. I pray that you would speak to our hearts. You would speak to our situations, and you would help shift us where shifting is needed. And you would speak to every place where speaking is needed. Father, we pray this in Jesus' mighty name. Now, let's get started. So, every single one of us loves the idea of a Jesus that saves us. We love the idea of a Jesus that comes into our situation and rescues us from trouble. We love the idea of a God who uses his power to intervene in our lives and save us from our problems. In fact, some people would say it's because we don't like problems. We want peace, right? As much as we love the idea of a Jesus who saves us, we struggle with the idea of this Jesus who allows us to go through storms sometimes. We struggle with the idea of a Jesus who not only lets us go through storms, but while we are going through those storms, he seems to be silent. He's not saying anything. He's quiet. He's not even giving us any indication that we might make it out of the storm. And not only are we going through a storm, and not only is he silent, but when we look to him, he looks like he's sleeping in our boats. Like, what's going on? Why the inactivity? Why not doing something while life is spinning and everything is going crazy? Why is Jesus sleeping in our boat? Now, I have heard so many sermons about this text. I've heard so many messages approaching this text, but one of the most common lessons that I've heard goes something like this. It goes like, if you only had faith like Jesus had, then you could do what Jesus did. Have you ever heard that message? That if you just believed like Jesus believed, then you could speak like Jesus spoke, and you could speak to that storm, and with the authority God gives you, that storm would come crashing down. Now, as much as I believe that message, and as much as I love that message, and as much as I want to be a person that does what Jesus does, when I looked at this text again, I began to see this text in a different light. As a person who wants to do what Jesus does, I realized when I looked at this text, Jesus didn't just have the ability to speak to a storm. No, that wasn't the first thing he did. As a person that wants to do what he does, I realized Jesus had this ability not just to speak to a storm, but he also had this ability to sleep through his storm. He had this ability to rest in his storm, to be unmoved in his storm, to be calm in the midst of his chaos, to be unshaken, to be able to be at rest, peace in the middle of his storm. Now, I don't know about you, but I need that. I need this inner strength that when life is spinning and everything is going crazy and God doesn't seem to be stopping what's happening, I need the ability to stand firm and find a place of rest in my soul in the midst of the surrounding storm. And I think one of the lessons that Jesus wants to teach us in this text, he wants to enable you to be able to sleep in your storm. Not to sleep through my sermon. No, that's not biblical. But to sleep through the storm that's surrounding you right now. Now, the disciples, much like you and I, they don't get this. They rise up and they're frustrated and they're freaking out. Some of the other gospels say they ask him, "Don't you care that we're about to die?" Why? They wake him up. They jolt him out of his sleep. And when he gets up, the first thing he says is, "Why are you so afraid? Why are you so afraid?" Now that question is a challenging question. It challenges me because it seems like he's saying, it seems like from Jesus's point of view, there's nothing that I'm going through that is supposed to produce fear in my soul. There's nothing about the storm that was supposed to create panic in my mind. It seems as if he's saying he's not denying the storm, but he seems to be challenging my response to the storm. He seems to be saying, "Jules, you're not reacting correctly to the thing that you're going through." He seems to be looking at my storm differently to the way I look to my storms. He says, why are you so afraid? Now he asks the question and then he answers the question. He says, oh, you of little faith. What is he saying? He's saying, the reason I'm so afraid is because I don't trust him. That's what faith is. It's trusting him. It's trusting him with your life. It's trusting him with your children. It's trusting him with your future. That's all faith is. It's that I trust him. He's saying, in the midst of the storm, the reason you're afraid is you don't trust me. You don't trust me. And he goes on to say, you of little faith. What does that mean? Why little faith? Now, we know when he says little, we know he's not talking about the size of our faith. Because later on, he's going to teach us that if you just had faith the size of a mustard seed, how big is a mustard seed? It's probably as big as a grain of salt. He says, if you just had faith the size of a mustard seed, you would speak to this mountain and that mountain would be cast in the sea. So he's not talking about the size of my faith. I would like to believe that you and I, both in this phase, have faith bigger than the size of a grain of salt. Hear me. He's not pointing to the size of your faith. He's actually pointing to the longevity of your faith. He's saying your faith doesn't last. It's little. You believed on Monday and then you're doubting by Wednesday. You are worshiping by the beginning of this year, and by the middle of the year, you don't even know whether God exists. Your faith doesn't last. It doesn't survive the storms. That when your faith comes face to face with all the winds and all the waves, your faith doesn't last. Why? Why don't you trust me? Is what he's challenging them. Now, I was speaking to my wife as I was getting ready to share this message, and I was sharing this with her, and she said to me, she said, perhaps one of the reasons that I don't, or we don't trust him is because we've been through so many storms, we've been through so many painful scenarios, and because of that we're struggling to trust. And I nodded my head because it sounded valid, and even in my own life I see that reality. But then I started to read the text all the way from the beginning of Matthew. If you go from the beginning of Matthew, we started at verse 23, but if you start from verse 1, here's what you start to see. You see that straight out the gate, when Jesus comes out, he heals a leprous man. He heals a man who's struggling from an incurable disease. He sees an impossibility and he does a miracle. So he heals the leprous man. Then the next thing, he goes to the centurion and he heals the centurion's son with a word. Just with a word, he does this miracle. And then right after that, he comes and he finds Peter's mother. Peter's mother is sick with a fever. And then once again, he prays over her and he heals her immediately. He heals Peter's loved one. And continuously after that night, it's miracle after miracle after miracle, right up until they come to the storm. And I started to wonder, why is it that if I look at my history with God, I can see miracle after miracle after miracle after miracle. But even though I can see miracle after miracle after miracle, when I come to my current storm, I don't face it with the strength of everything God has done. I come to the storm and instead of praising God and believing God and trusting God, I just end up being doubtful. I end up being fearful. I end up being emotional. Why is that? Why is it that my heart is shaped more by the storms that I've faced, rather than my heart being shaped by the miracles God has done in your life? Look at what God has done in your history. Why doesn't that shape how we trust our God? Why is it that the things that we've been through cause us to look at him with a doubtful eye? And as I was thinking about this question started to burn in my soul. And I don't know whether this question was from God or whether it was just from me, but I started to wonder, how long? How long is it going to take before I trust him? How long is it? How many things does God have to do in my life before I can come to every storm with trust in my heart? How long is it going to take? How many healings must I see? How many breakthroughs must I see? Because for every storm that he's allowed me to face, you know what? He's also brought me through those storms. Look at everything that he's allowed you to face. Didn't he bring you through? How long is it going to take before I trust him? Now, Pastor Jude would say, the enemy of our faith, do you know what it is? The enemy of our faith is our forgetfulness. Simple as that. We forget. We forget that time when I couldn't pay rent and God came through. We forget that time where I was sick and I didn't know what was going to happen and God came through. We forget that time where I was facing a business challenge and we didn't have an idea how we were going to build this, and then God came through. And now that you're facing whatever you're facing, won't you believe that God will come through? He says, why are you so afraid? You of little faith, will you trust me? Now, this portion, sleeping Jesus, what he's trying to teach us, he's trying to invite us into an inner power. He's trying to bring us to a space where we can stand on trust and in the confidence of who God is, and it can build in us an inner power. So he rises up with the disciples. He casts the storms away. And as he casts the storms away, these guys are looking at him and they ask this question, who is this man? Who is this man that the winds and the waves obey him? Let me tell you what's happening. What's happening here is that Jesus has stepped into the God zone, for lack of a better word. He has stepped into doing something that the onlookers can tell what he did, only God can do that. What just happened here, only God can do that. Have you ever been in that scenario where you look at something and you realize what just happened here, only God can do that? That's what they're looking at. They're looking at him and he's done this miracle. And this miracle, we would call it a sign. Because a sign doesn't point to itself. A sign points to something beyond itself. So what he's doing, he's done this miracle so that we can see what he did, but we can also see through what he did, and we can notice a truth that's beyond the action. In other words, he wants us to look at Jesus. And when we see what Jesus is doing, we start to realize, as Fred Hammond would say, he is not just a man. He is God. Do you know why you can trust him? Because he is God. Do you know why you can rest your life on him? Because he is God. Do you know why you're not going to sink in the storm? Because he is God. And you know what? He's right there in your boat with you. How do we get this inner power? We get this inner power by trusting him. And we get this inner power by recognizing that the one who's with you, he's God. He's God. And there is no storm you will ever face that is bigger than the God who's in that boat with you. So let's move on. Now, as we are moving on, or rather as the disciples are moving on, they come to the shore. And it's important that they have seen that Jesus has power over the wind and the waves, because we are about to encounter the kingdom of God clashing with the kingdom of darkness. And we're about to see that God is so powerful, just like turning on a light. When the light is turned on, the darkness has to flee. So they come to this shore. And when they get to the shore, these demon-possessed men come to them. They meet these demon-possessed men. And as they meet these demon-possessed men, we are about to meet weird Jesus. So let's talk about weird Jesus for a second. Now, every time we talk about demons and spirits and things like that, it gets pretty weird. And sometimes people can fall on one of two extremes, and we want to avoid that as Bryanston. Either on the one end, they can fall on the extreme of over-spiritualizing situations. Or on the other end, they can fall on the extreme of under-spiritualizing situations. Now, when people over-spiritualize, everything becomes a demon. Everything that they're facing is because of some spirit. So why did I lose my job? It wasn't me. It must have been a demon. Why did I lose that boyfriend or that relationship? It wasn't me. It must have been some demon. Why did I crash my car? It wasn't me. It wasn't any drinking. It wasn't that I lost any attention. It must have been some auntie somewhere who put something in some cup and I drank it, and now every time I'm trying to build my life keeps falling apart. When people over-spiritualize, they fall into the danger of not being able to recognize their own faults. And when you misdiagnose the problem, then you can't come to the right solution. When you think the problem is somewhere out there, then you can't do the work on working on yourself. Because let me say it like this. We can't cast out the demon if the demon is you. we can't cast it out if the issue is you. That perhaps the reason you lost the job wasn't a demon. Perhaps it's how you're treating people. Perhaps it's that you're missing the deadlines. Perhaps it's how you're working or functioning at your workplace. Perhaps the reason you lost that relationship, perhaps it's because of how you're treating that guy. Or maybe it's the other way around. Perhaps it's because that guy is a nulls. He's not a great person, or she's not a great person. It sometimes isn't spiritual. Many times, it's actually me. And if the issue is you, we can't cast it out. Now, I want you to hold that there for a second. And let's talk about the guys who under-spiritualize. The people who under-spiritualize, if we over-spiritualize, we demonize. But if we under-spiritualize, in fact, let me take you to this verse. 2 Corinthians 2 verse 11 says this. Let me paraphrase it. It says, we are not ignorant of the devil's devices, lest he take advantage of us. He says, we are not ignorant of the devil's devices, his schemes. That word means tactics. He says, we are not ignorant of the devil's devices, because if we're ignorant of the devil's devices, he's going to have an advantage of us. When we under-spiritualize, what it does, it makes us ignorant. It makes us ignorant, and the enemy's advantage is our ignorance. He thrives on us being unaware of what he's trying to do. Let me say it like this, that the thing that the thief wants most is to be able to come to your house. And when he comes to your house, he finds you sleeping. He finds you comfortable. He finds you dreaming. He finds you unaware of what he's trying to do at your house. He wants to be able to steal all he can steal and grab all he can grab and take all he can take while you're unaware. Because if you had to wake up you could fight back. So the thing that the thief wants the least is that he would come to your place and find you awake, or find your house armed, or find you prepared, because he knows if you were ready and you had to fight back, the scripture says if you resist him, then he has to flee. But when we're ignorant, we don't even have an awareness of what he's trying to do in our lives. So we don't want to fall into any one of those extremes. We don't want to over-spiritualize, and we don't want to under-spiritualize. Some of us here, we need discipline. We need to recognize the things in our life that we need to do, and we just need to discipline ourselves. So don't come and say, oh, I've got some spirit of laziness. No, it's not a spirit of laziness. You are lazy, and you need to discipline yourself. But some of us don't just need discipline, we actually need deliverance. We actually need a power that is greater than ours to come into our space and help us get free from something we don't have the strength to get free from. So either you need discipline or you might need deliverance. Now here's the last thing I want to say on this before I move on. Discipline does not replace the need for deliverance. If you need deliverance, no amount of discipline, no amount of slugging it out and willing it out is going to replace the need for deliverance. And the vice versa is also true. Deliverance does not replace the need for discipline. That you can come and pray, but if you don't do the work, you may not see the outcome that you're wanting. Now, the challenge is for us to get discernment to recognize, when do I need discipline and when do I need deliverance? Let me tell you a story. Many years ago, when I started out in ministry, I was working with the homeless. That's how we started out. And our main two things that we were trying to help people with was salvation and self-sustainability. We would work with homeless kids and homeless adults, and we were trying to help them get to a place where they could stand on their own 2 feet. And it was an amazing time. Part of what that ministry also invited in my life is a lot of great people who wanted to serve the poor and wanted to do amazing things. One friend in particular, let's call him Billy. One friend in particular, he came in. Billy was a wealthy guy. He had a lot of money. He came from a wealthy family. He had the best kind of car. He had the kind of house that has tennis courts and pools and all the perks. He had a great job and a lot of money that was coming with that job. But Billy he had in his younger years, he had lived a wild life. He had drank a lot of things and smoked a lot of things, and it had caused the chemicals in his mind to be somewhat dysfunctional. So Billy had a lot of money, and because of that, he was able to get the medication. He had money, he had medication, but as we continued to journey, it became apparent that he was facing something that all the money he had couldn't fix. And all the medication that he had access to couldn't fix that situation. One day, Billy and I were at my house in Cresta at that time, and we were praying, just worshiping the Lord, just a usual kind of Christian day. And while we are praying, we're busy going through certain verses, and all of a sudden I hear, yeah. And I'm like, what? And I keep on praying, and all of a sudden, yeah. And I'm like, Jesus, help me. I was young at that time. I wish I knew the things I know now. I didn't know what to do. As we're praying, all of a sudden, his body started gyrating, his body started moving and twisting, and sound started coming out of him. And I just kept on praying. And eventually, when he calmed down and he got to his right mind, we went our separate ways. I didn't know what to do. I'll confess it right here. I didn't know what to do. Some time after that, I want to introduce you to another friend. His name is, let's call him Ransu. Ransu was a young homeless guy. He was a bright young man. He was strong. He was looking forward to tackle Johannesburg. He came from Limpopo, and he was just ready to find a space in Joburg and make his money and develop his life. And because he was homeless, and because my friend Billy had a heart to help people, he took Ransu in. Ransu moved into his house, and as he's staying at his house, he gave him a job. And this young boy, he was probably 19 at the time, only had a grade 6 education. All of a sudden, he was in this great job, getting this great money, and everything looked like it was going perfect. A few months later, Billy lost the fight with the thing that he was fighting with. And unfortunately, Billy committed suicide. He was not able to win the battle with the things that he was dealing with. And he took his life. And we mourned, and it was difficult, and I couldn't help but feeling like, why couldn't I help him? Long time ago. The weirdest part of the story wasn't even that. The weirdest part of the story is 1 month after Billy committed suicide, our friend Ransu started to exhibit the very same symptoms that Billy was dealing with. All of a sudden, Ransu, who was a bright young man, all of a sudden he was tired all the time. All of a sudden he couldn't focus. All of a sudden he started hearing things. All of a sudden he didn't want to live anymore. All of a sudden he didn't want to stay in the job he was in. All of a sudden he started getting sick, and not only was a twisting beginning to happen in his body, but he started to develop some kind of scoliosis, and I couldn't help him. I didn't know what to do at the time. And Ransu went through being so vibrant to being this weak, broken young man that was going through what looked was going to be great, but all of a sudden his life started crashing. And I don't even know where he is right now. I give you this story, not a story with a happy ending. I give you this story, and I leave that tension with you, because some of you listening to me, some of you don't just need another great sermon. Some of us don't just need another 5-step plan of how we can get victory over spirits that we're dealing with. Some of us, we just need this Jesus. As weird as he is, we need the Jesus who knows how to come to your tomb. We need the Jesus who knows exactly what you're dealing with. We need the Jesus who knows how to discern between, is that a spiritual issue or is that just a natural issue? We need the Jesus who in one word, he could speak to these two men. And as he said, go, the thing that was sitting on their neck, it left them, and they were back in their right mind. We need this Jesus. As weird as he is, we need what this Jesus teaches us. Now, sleeping Jesus teaches us about an inner power. But this weird Jesus teaches us about a supernatural power. He teaches us about a supernatural power because some of the things you're facing, they're not just natural. Some of the things we're going through, they're not just natural. So what the scripture is trying to do, it's trying to invite you into a deeper reality. It's trying to invite you into a deeper truth. It's trying to show you that this world is not just natural, that there is more to this world than what you can see. And some of the things that people are facing, that there is more that is happening in people's lives than what we can see with our spiritual eyes or with our physical eyes. Rather, some people are facing things that's just more. And we need supernatural power. We need a God who can come through and deal with the things that we cannot see, both on an individual level. But if we're going to take this scripture seriously and this Bible seriously, it tells us that not just on an individual level, but even on a national level, that there are things happening in the nation that have forces behind them. The scripture would call them rulers, authorities, principalities, spiritual forces behind some of the things. We need supernatural power. Now, let me say one last thing on this text and then I want to shift. When he casts out these demons go into these pigs, and these pigs go down this steep bank into this lake and they drown. And the imagery here is supposed to remind us of something. That when those pigs are rushing down that bank and they drown, what's happening is the thing that was oppressing this man is drowned in that water. Where do you remember this imagery? Do you remember when God was rescuing the Israelites? Do you remember when he pulled them out of Egypt? As he pulled them out of Egypt, they're coming down and they come to this body of water. And when they reach this body of water, they're scared. They have no idea what's going to happen. And God says to Moses, "Be still and know that I am God." That's inner power. He says, "Be still because I will fight for you." Moses raises his hand and he prays over that. And before we know it, the God who commands the wind and the waves shows up again. And all of that sea parts and the Israelites go through on dry land and they're saved. As they look back, they see this herd of pigs. They see this army of soldiers rushing down to meet them. They see their oppressor rushing down to meet them. And that oppressor goes into the waters. But as he goes into the waters, God drowns the thing that was oppressing, or rather the entity that was oppressing the people of Israel, the Israelite people. And God says this over that moment. He says, "The Egyptian that you see today, you will see no more." That's my prayer over you. My prayer over you is that a Jesus would come into your life and he would bring kingdom power into your life. And the thing that has been oppressing you, you would see no more. Now, when he drowns those pigs, the people come and they see those pigs drowned, and they ask him to leave. He does this radical work, and they ask him to leave. Why do they ask him to leave? So let's go to our last part here. Let's talk about radical Jesus. Now, Jesus has cast out these pigs. He has cast out these demons, and he has drowned these pigs. And as he's drowned these pigs, what has happened is the people here, they've had loss. And to give you a better understanding of the setting, this area, the Gadarenes, is part of a region called the Decapolis. It means the 10 cities. Deca for 10, polis for cities. The Decapolis, 10 cities. And this is areas that is occupied by Romans. This is Roman land. This is not Jewish land. And so these Jewish boys, Jesus and the disciples, they have gone over the Sea of Galilee and they have gone to this Roman land. This is a foreign land for them, right? When they get there, or rather, let me say it like this. From the Romans' perspective, as they look at these two demon-possessed men, who are these possessed men to them? From the Roman perspective, these men are outcasts, they are poor, they are crazy, they are a nuisance, they are not contributing to society. Who are they? They are dirty, they are ostracized, they are marginalized, they are the people, the crazy people that live over there. That's who these two men are to the Romans. But Jesus is coming for them. From the Jewish perspective, as the Jewish people, as the disciples are coming into the land, who are these two men? These two men, they are foreigners, they are colonizers because they are the Romans, and the Roman government is what is colonizing them now. Not only that, they are unclean. They are living in the tombs. For a young Jewish boy, touching anything that is dead makes you unclean. There is nobody who is more unclean than these two men. So they are coming there, they are unclean, they are ostracized, they are poor, they are crazy, they are the people nobody else would want to go to. But Jesus comes for them. He comes for the dirty. He comes for the unclean. He comes for the marginalized. He comes for the forgotten. He comes for the oppressed. He comes for the hurting. He comes for the ones that we have allowed to live in the tombs. That's who Jesus comes for. And if you're here and you feel unclean for any reason, maybe you've done something that has made you feel dirty, I want to tell you, Jesus comes for you. And he only came for this too. He didn't even speak to anybody else. He crossed the whole sea to come for those two. And if you're here and you feel like the poor person, the alone person, the isolated person, I want you to know Jesus would leave his home, pass through the storms, just to come for you. Now, here's where I want to start wrapping things up. When he does this, the city comes to him and they ask him to leave. Why do they ask him to leave? Why are they asking Jesus to leave this region? Let me tell you why. They have encountered the Jesus who cares more about people than about their pigs. They're encountering the Jesus who cares more about setting people free than about making money. They're encountering the Jesus who's teaching them that setting people free has a cost. There's a cost to this freedom. And this Jesus enters this space, and I don't blame them for wanting him to leave. How would you feel? How would you feel if this Jesus came to your company and he came into your organization and he wanted to set people free? How would you feel if Jesus setting people free in your company meant that you would lose money? Would you receive that Jesus? How would you feel if this Jesus comes into our politics and for setting people free in our country, it means that we could lose our pigs? Would you receive this Jesus? How would you feel in your personal life if Jesus comes to you and setting you free means that you would have to lose your pigs? Would you receive this Jesus? They say, we don't want this Jesus. They want him to leave and to leave this region. So let me say this. Sleeping Jesus, once again, he teaches us about this inner power. This weird Jesus teaches us about this supernatural power. But this radical Jesus, he teaches us about the God of those who have no power. The God who exerts himself for those who have no power. And later on in the story, as we know, as he teaches us that freedom comes with a cost, it's going to cost him his life to free humanity. He's going to lay his life down. So he's not charging them their pigs, or he's not costing them their pigs. He's not doing something that he's not willing to do for himself. It's going to cost him his life to set all of us free. And he pays that price, because freedom comes with a cost. Now, as I end off this message, I want to say this to you, that we may not want this Jesus who sleeps in the boat. He may not be the Jesus we want, but we need this Jesus who teaches us about an inner power that we can face as we go into our week. We may not want this weird Jesus who speaks about demons and invisible things, but we need this Jesus who can help us understand about supernatural realities and give us supernatural power. We may not want the Jesus who drowns our pigs, but we need the Jesus who is the God of those who have no power. You may not want this Jesus, but I want to say to you that this is the Jesus you need. You need him. You need him to strengthen you inside, to strengthen you supernaturally, and to show you the strength for those who have no power. And I pray that today, even if he may not be the Jesus you want, that you would rise up and you'd receive him, because he is the Jesus that you need.